For the hunting season of 2017, I got in on a lease with a guy from work. I didn't have time to check the area out before the season started, so the inevitable occurred and I got lost my first day. That morning I left the camp just before dawn. I'm not the kind that hunts from a stand. I'm your traditional stalk and shoot type of hunter. Since I wasn't familiar with the lease and I stupidly left my GPS back at the camp, I had to stick to the main paths in order to not get lost. Most of the morning I did well. However, as I grew tired, I lost focus and veered from the trail. In my defense, I came across this really fresh set of tracks. Of course, I had to follow them. The sucky thing was that they continued on to a neighboring property and I had to stop following them. When I looked up, I realized I was way off the trail and didn't know how to get back. The rest of the day was spent trying to find my way back to camp. About an hour before dark, I noticed a rundown house and cabin in the distance. By now, I wasn't sure whose property I was on. I hoped that if somebody was living there, they could help me, but as I got closer, I could tell the place had been abandoned for a good while. I knocked to make sure, but with no reply, I made myself at home. My first goal was to get a fire going. After I did that, I began combing through the cabinets for food and other things I thought could help me. Not much but a questionable can of chili and some candles were found. I heated up the chili over the fire and combined it with a half-eaten bag of chips. After dinner, I looked through the bedroom and discovered an old map of the area. I wasn't sure how accurate it would be after all that time, but I was happy to find it. I spread it out on the floor in front of the fireplace and planned my course for the morning. I was shocked to see that I had veered over 5 miles from where I'd started. At some point, I must have dozed off. During the night, I had a super vivid dream that a man was sitting in the chair next to me and just staring. He never said a word. And when I jerked awake and saw that I was alone, I was relieved and quickly fell back asleep. The following morning, I woke up at 6:15 and got my stuff together. I made sure the fire was completely put out and headed back to camp. I just stepped from the house when I came face to face with a strange man. The guy from my dream, in fact. I was confused at first, and when he spoke, I knew my dream had really happened. This man was holding an old Marlin 30-30, not an odd sight for a hunter during deer season. This dude didn't look like a hunter, though. He wore an old, dirty backpack and normal, bright, yet dingy street clothes. His eyes had a very crazed look to them that made me uncomfortable to gaze at. I was surprised, but regained my calm and said, "Good morning." Instead of saying it back, he just stared at me with those crazed black eyes. I began to say something, but he interrupted and asked what I was doing in the cabin. Before I could answer, he blurted out that it was his place. I continued and explained what had happened the day before. The entire time I was telling him this, he was gripping the rifle so tightly his knuckles were beginning to turn white. His behavior was beginning to scare me. The only thing I wanted to do was get back to camp and then home. The last word had barely left my lips before he angrily told me that it was his place. It appeared to have been empty for quite a while, but I wasn't going to argue with him. I apologized as quickly as I could and went on my way. For a good 100 yards or more, I kept looking behind me. I was waiting to get shot in the back. Every time I looked back, he was staring maniacally back at me and death gripping his gun. It took a couple of hours to find my way back, but by then, I'd had plenty of time to dwell upon our encounter, and I was truly freaked out by then. It actually hit me. The guys that were still in camp were happy to see me and asked what had happened. I just said I got lost and camped out for the night, never mentioning the nutcase that I met. I doubt that they take it seriously anyhow. The whole experience had me so scared I wanted nothing more than get home. The other guys must have thought I was crazy. After throwing all my stuff into the back of my truck, I tore off out of there and never returned. I knew I'd never be able to feel safe knowing that kook was somewhere out in the woods, possibly watching our party. That following Monday, my friend asked what had caused me to leave so abruptly. I made up some lie about my wife being sick. I'm not sure if he even believed it. Nothing was said about it again, and Maybe, just maybe, things are better that way.
I'm an office manager, and being the manager of a company has its perks sometimes, but it also means I have to be the one to let people go. In this one instance, I had to fire a man named Hooper. What made it awkward was he was dating my best friend, Olivia. She had asked me to give Hooper a job. As she's my friend, I gave him a 4-month trial basis. I won't go into detail too much about why I needed to fire him, but it was basically he just didn't know how to do his job. I had to let Olivia know the day before I was about to let Hooper go. She was understanding and thankful I gave him a chance. That following morning, I called Hooper in my office and told him that we were letting him go. He didn't really say much, but the expression on his face was surprised but also a little mad, which is understandable as he had just got fired from a job. But he left the office, and I carried on with my day as usual. Later that evening, I got in my car, but before starting it, I received a Zoom call from my bosses. I will skip most of the conversation because it's private and irrelevant. At one point, one of my bosses said, "Courtney, please tell me you have finally fired Hooper." I replied saying, "Yes, I have." Then my boss said, "Thank God, he was useless," and letting out a laugh with some of the other bosses. Later that night, I was in bed asleep, and I woke up to what I initially thought was my phone ringing. But after listening more carefully, I realized it wasn't a phone call. It was a recording of some kind. I kept hearing it on repeat. Thank God he was useless. Thank God he was useless. Thank God he was useless. With laughing in the background over and over. It was the Zoom conversation I had with me and my bosses earlier that night. I looked around my room and there was an old tape recorder sitting on my cabinet. Someone had broken into my house and put that there. I went downstairs and saw the front door was open. Of course, the first thing I did was call the cops, and I told them I suspected it was Hooper, who had put the recording there. What's creepy was, no one had seen him again, not even Olivia. She said that he just vanished and stopped responding to her calls and texts. People lose their jobs every day, but it's scary to think how people will react. I don't understand what Hooper's intentions were with recording, and quite frankly, I don't think I want to know.
Before I begin, I should state that this was a few years ago and I'm a tiny woman. Back at this time I look like a teenager, so I've always been mindful that I seem an easy target or easier to fool. I had seen a job interview for a small business looking for a secretary. No experience needed as they would provide on-the-job training, and as that's the kind of thing I was looking for, I applied. I heard back quickly and was invited to an interview. When I arrived, I was excited. It was a bit of a journey from my home, but it was in a beautiful old building on the 3rd floor with a modern layout inside, though you could tell it was very new as it was bare bones and very little had been unpacked. Still, though, if you have to work somewhere, might as well be a nice building, right? Anyway, the interviews seemed normal. I only encountered female members of staff, and they were all warm and lovely. The woman interviewing me was amazing and even sat talking to me for a while after getting to know me. When I get home, I wasn't in the door long before I get a phone call from them. I nailed the interview. Awesome, I thought, and I was offered the job. I was about to accept when I was told on the phone, "Okay, you'll come here tomorrow and we'll have the van drive you to where you'll be working." And I was like, what? Confused about what they meant. They then told me that I'd be meeting with customers on their behalf and talking and selling stuff. I was not comfortable with this, as it wasn't what I was interviewed for, but I gave them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they had a second position that they thought I'd fit in better with. It wouldn't be that weird as a new company, and, while not what I was comfortable with, I should hear them out. So I asked more questions, and the woman on the other end of the line is getting more snippy and tense. Gone was the nice, friendly woman from earlier, and she would not reveal where I would be going or who I would be meeting with. By this point, plenty of red flags were going off, so I had to decline the offer pretty quick. For anyone curious as to what had happened, I reported this as it seemed very dodgy. But when they were checked in on, the floor was no longer occupied by them. They'd apparently just rented it for a week and were gone.